Lucas and Kurtz had made the decision to film in England, but for the desert planet scenes they would have to haul everything down to Tunisia for the location shooting. Because of the loss of pre-production time, the last of the sets and props had to be sent down in a rented cargo plane. One of the paradoxical problems that they had with Fox. They would make demands in the name of saving money. That was driving up the cost. Whether it was having to rush things through at the last minute at great expense, or not being able to schedule things properly. One of the worst parts was that most of the hotel rooms were booked, and you'd have to cram 3 or 4 people to a room, trying to sleep before having to go out into an exhausting shoot in the desert. On hand to enjoy that were the last 2 of the main heroes, Mark Hamill, who had gotten the part of Luke Skywalker despite his expectations, and the named actor of the picture, Sir Alec Guinness. Guinness was one of 2 film legends that Lucas had in mind, the other being Toshiro Mifune, who played the general in The Hidden Fortress, and by now, Obi-Wan Kenobi was in the role of what was originally General Luke Skywalker in the first draft, so it was fitting. The casting director was able to deliver a copy of the script to Guinness while he was working on the film Murder by Death, and while he was initially hesitant to do science fiction, on the basis of the script and the work Lucas had done on American Graffiti, the iconic actor was interested, although conditionally. First, he wouldn't have to do any publicity for the film, and he wanted a percentage of the royalties that Lucas himself was receiving. As you can imagine, the success of Star Wars would go on to make Guinness a very wealthy man. The shoot was difficult. Bad weather destroyed sets, clouds would prevent them from filming. It can't very well be a desert planet if it looks like it's going to rain. And because of the shortened pre-production time, there hadn't been enough time to make sure the robots would all be functional. A problem further exacerbated because the mica deposits in the sand were causing nearby radio signals to interfere with the remote controls for the robots. At one point, this caused R2-D2 to roll out of control, and it wandered onto the set of another film that was being produced out here. Of all of the films that it could be, it turned out it was Jesus of Nazareth. Although it's entirely possible that the presence of a Saint Luke might have confused the droid as to which one was its owner. What's more, in order to get into this particular area of the desert, the only thing that was available was Tunisian military trucks. Well, that really shouldn't be a problem, and the Tunisian military was willing to go along with it. They did this kind of thing all of the time. It's part of the tourism business out there. But they happened to be shooting near the border with Algeria, and it seemed that Barry's team had done a little bit too good of a job of fulfilling Lucas's mandate of make everything look like it's real, make the sandcrawler look like it's an actual vehicle. And so to the Algerians, it appeared that the Tunisian military was constructing some massive new weapon near their border, and they had to come out and inspect the sandcrawler themselves so that they could report back to the government that this was not a prelude to an invasion, or who knows what could have happened. I don't think the movie would have gone down as well if Obi-Wan pointed to the damaged sandcrawler and said, "Only Algerian helicopters are so precise." Contributing to the strain Lucas was under was the decision to kill Obi-Wan during the escape from the Death Star. And what's more, without giving the veteran actor a chance to have a real death scene, he was just going to disappear. Lucas had been struggling over this, but it was his wife Marcia that convinced him it was needed. Marcia's role in the success of Star Wars often goes unstated, but she often added the heart that George Lucas's intellectualism was often lacking. But really, Obi-Wan would need to die. Otherwise, this place called the Death Star was surprisingly devoid of any death on the hero's part. Guinness was a professional, but he was personally hurt to find out that suddenly his character was going to be killed off. So in addition to foul weather, malfunctioning props, the international incident, and possible blasphemy, though it is ironic that the crew for Jesus of Nazareth were the ones who were told, no, there's plenty of room at the inn. But on top of all those other problems, Lucas had to find a way to give Guinness the bad news and keep him happy. Of course, Guinness never let that interfere with his performance, though. Also doing his best to take the role in stride was Anthony Daniels, whose C-3PO costume was such a nightmare that the actor was soon officially listed as a prop and was to be handled accordingly. That's not good for your ego. By the time it was over, Lucas was very disappointed, having only shot about 2/3 of what he wanted. But they had already planned to pick up some things in America anyway, such as the Banthas. He would have to leave that for later. Right now they needed to get on the road back to England. Two important characters were waiting as well in England, to be played by Peter Cushing and David Prowse, both of whom had worked together on several Hammer horror films. Prowse was to be the body for Darth Vader. Lucas had always planned to have someone else dub the lines over. But because of his mysterious nature, Lucas wanted to have a clearly human villain as well, which was Grand Moff Tarkin, the Imperial in command of the Death Star. Cushing was very gracious. He was Lucas's first choice for the role and commented that at his age, it's nice just to be remembered. And while he would joke about being upstaged by special effects, he would go on to say that his only disappointment with Star Wars was that because he died, he couldn't appear in any more Star Wars movies. If only he knew. As for Prowse, he'd been given a choice between Chewbacca and Vader, and wisely knew that the villain is often the more memorable character. The Wookiee would instead be played by hospital porter Peter Mayhew. Stuart Freeborn, who had done makeup on 2001: A Space Odyssey, was hired to bring the same kind of realism that he did for the apes in that film for Chewbacca, to make him not just a mask, but an expressive and real-looking character. An important part of the casting for Lucas was watching the actors interact with each other, and this was one of the most successful parts of the shoot in London, because the chemistry between them not only allowed them to play well together, but to play off of each other, going off script in many cases to inject a bit of humor into the situation. Lucas approved of this kind of thing, within reason. His philosophy was that if an actor felt the line needed to be changed, it probably did, since they were spending their time focused upon their character and being in that character's head, understanding the way that they think, while he, looking at the big picture, might not have seen something. This camaraderie actually made things difficult for Carrie Fisher. She thought Peter Cushing was this incredibly kind and gentlemanly person, and yet on camera she was supposed to despise him like he was the kind of man who would make Hitler aghast. She had to make a snarky comment about his foul stench, when he literally smelled of lavender. Cushing would actually splash lavender water on himself and use mouthwash whenever he went out to make sure that his body odor or bad breath would never bother his fellow actors. He was just that considerate a person. But while the cast was getting on very well, there was conflict amongst the crew. Barry and Gil Taylor, the director of photography, clashed because of the difficulty of lighting the sets that Barry would build. Plus, Taylor's camera operator felt that Lucas was an upstart trying to tell him what to do with the camera. The crazy thing was, when Lucas went to film school, his original aspiration was to operate the camera. That's all he had really wanted. When I talk about the unique vision that Lucas's student films had, it's important to understand that this isn't the typical flattery of, oh, his imagination and coming up with these places and people. Lucas won award after award because the approach to the looks of his films were so unique and creative. It just blew people away with what Lucas was doing with a camera.
It's the only thing worth dying for.
They're people, and people should be free.
Freedom's a thing you have to deserve. You have to work for it.
Without freedom, there's no reason to live.
But for what is life if you're not free? It's hardly a life.
Without freedom, man can't exist properly. A man has to be free because it's his nature to be free. And anything that restricts or in any way hampers freedom, in a way, causes man's death.
And that's why many were so encouraging him to take that vision in a different direction, which is what ultimately led him to be here. And in the ironic position that the one area that Lucas was most comfortable with in filming, handling the camera, was in the hands of someone who was doing nothing creative with it. So even though Lucas was talking to the operator in a way that clearly showed he knew what he was talking about, Lucas was so versed that he wrote a technical piece for an industry magazine on the specific camera that they used in THX. And yet despite that, the operator was indignant at this young American telling him what to do. Lucas had a similar problem with the editor, who didn't seem to understand what Lucas was trying to do with this film, and was growing more and more impatient with Lucas's involvement, until finally he was removed. The editor had to be hired in place of the one that Lucas had originally been hoping for, Richard Chew. But Chew was just coming off a major edit and was very tired. Plus, he was a very talented editor and so would need to be paid more. So at the time, it had seemed like hiring a local editor was the right move. Instead, it would wind up costing more money because time was running out. They would need to return to America and hope that Lucas could find editors to work around both those problems. What's worse, there were major problems at ILM. It was quickly looking like both Star Wars and Lucas's career had come to a premature end.